Shalom and welcome back to By His Grace Marriage Ministry Podcast. My name's Amanda, and Shabbat Shalom to those of you who keep the seventh-day Sabbath. I pray that you're having a blessed and restful day. So welcome to today's episode. This is actually going to be part 3 of the dangers of lust. So if you have started to play this episode and you have not yet listened to part 1 and part 2, I would encourage you to stop this episode and go and listen to part 1 and then part 2 and then come back to part 3. Praise be to Yah. He laid this word on my heart, and it's been heavy on my heart for some time, and just kind of in the back of my mind for a little bit as I was working on the audio scriptures and another marriage word that I actually previously did that was tied in with the last book that I recorded on the audio scriptures, the book of Tobit. And I felt that it was time to go ahead and release it and share my thoughts, my heart, and examine various scriptures or accounts within the scriptures that really show us the dangers of lust and how serious that sin is and how powerful that the stronghold of lust can be and how wicked and evil that the spirit of lust is. And we see that in various accounts throughout the scriptures. And part 1 and part 2, I shared various accounts throughout. One had to do with Joseph, one had to do with Reuben, one had to do with David, another had to do with David's son Amnon. We saw quite a few different things there, and it's just really terrible what lust can do to a person. Same with other various works of the flesh. It's really just not only serious sin, and it is sin because it's transgression of Yahuwah's Torah, his law. And, why did Yahuwah, make that a part of his law to where he's like, hey, don't do this, is because he knows how serious and how dangerous and how harmful these things can be to us. That's why he says these things. And so anyways, I was talking about that in part 1 and part 2, went over and examined various accounts throughout the scriptures concerning lust. And now today in part 3, I want to share a little bit of a personal trial that I endured, that I experienced having to do with the stronghold of lust, or the spirit of lust, if you will. And I'm not going to go into too much detail just because it is of a sensitive and personal matter to me, and it's of course not something that I'm proud of. And this is taking a lot of courage for me to share this openly on my podcast. I would just hope and pray that there wouldn't be any judgment passed towards me, and that rather this would be used to just further, explain and show how important it is for us to guard ourselves, to guard our purity, to guard our eyes, to keep ourselves, on the path of righteousness with Yahuwah through Yahushua, and to be in prayer and in his word daily to protect ourselves and guard ourselves from such wicked spirits such as lust and so many others that are out there. So I just hope that by me sharing this, it serves for that purpose and not for anyone to think differently of me or to pass judgment or anything like that. We all fall short. We all make mistakes. Praise Yahuwah that through his son Yahushua we can be forgiven if we repent and turn away from our sins, and given a second chance through his mercy and grace as well. And so that's the point, hopefully, and purpose, I guess more I should say instead of point. That's the purpose of part 3, is to hopefully do that in Yahushua's name. Before I get into that, I actually want to share one more small account that I actually came across in the book of the writings of Abraham. And I'm not going to share too much because hopefully this is actually going to be the next book that I'm going to be recording for these set apart audio scriptures in Yahushua's name. Hopefully nothing happens with the first episode that I release. And if it does, then I'm going to have to move on to a different book, which more than likely will be Second Esdras is what I feel led to do. I'm not really sure yet. I'm trying. My goal was to record majority of the Apocrypha or the Matmonim, the books within the Matmonim, but it's proving to be a challenge for certain books. I'm not sure why that is. So, but anyways, I want to share an account. I was reminded earlier of an account that also reflects a situation of lust that I just want to share real quick, and then I will go into my personal trial that I endured concerning the same thing. So again, I'm going to be reading from the writings of Abraham. This isn't necessarily a part of the Apocrypha per se, but it is a book or writings that were found. And let me just read it to you real quickly. If it has it, let me see. Oh, maybe it doesn't. I believe that it was like found, or maybe it does. Like a fragment of the writings were found, like on papyri or something like that, or so kind of like how there was a lot of fragments that were found, like amongst like the Dead Sea Scrolls and things like that. I guess it's more or less the same thing with this book as well. So I have read it through once before, or actually this will be once before, and it does tie in with Jubilees in Jashar, because Jubilees in Jashar goes into the life of Abraham as well in a little more detail. So it does kind of go hand in hand with it. There's not a whole lot of contradictions that I've seen, but my personal opinion, I feel it to be scripture. I feel that it ties in with other books, and so I do have it as part of my collection, and it is something that I will be hopefully be able to share on the audio scriptures. So stay tuned for that. If you don't see anything within the next couple of days, that means I recorded and published it and it was taken down and I'm going to have to move on, or hopefully you will see the first episode for that book in Yahushua's name. So anyways, let's jump into the topic for this episode. So again, I'm just going to share a quick I'm just going to share a quick account of something similar here. So real quick, just kind of give you the backdrop of the story real quick, because I'm not going to read much. I don't want to reveal too much since this may be the next book that I'll be releasing on the audio scriptures. So Abraham and his wife Sarai, this is before their names were changed by Yahuwah, were journeying. They were going to Mitzrayim, Egypt. And this is the part, and it's in Genesis as well, just not in great detail, where Abraham basically tells, Sarah or Sarai to tell the Pharaoh that, she is his sister and not his wife, because if the Pharaoh knows that, their husband and wife, he would end up killing Abraham in order to obtain Sarah, to claim her as his wife due to her beauty, basically. And we actually learn in this book, The Writings of Abraham, that Yahuwah actually instructed Abraham to do that. So Abraham actually didn't lie. He was actually instructed by Yahuwah to do that. So anyways, that's the backdrop of this, and that's where I'm going to be reading from. And I just wanted to share a part with the Pharaoh, because this has to do with, once again, lust. So I'm going to start in chapter 66, and I'm going to read until, I think, 67. Okay. So it says, when the men departed from me, they went directly into the presence of Pharaoh, and when they had eaten with him, he had good wine brought forth. While they drank together, they began to speak unto him of what had transpired, but all they could speak of were the beauties of Sarai. How beautiful is the woman Sarai, they said, who sit at Abram's right hand. How comely is the shape of her face, how delicate and fine spun are her tresses. How beautiful her eyes, How delicate is her nose, and the whole luster of her countenance. How fair are her breasts, and how comely withal is her complexion. How comely, too, are her arms, and how perfect her hands. How pleasing are her hands to behold. How lovely her palms, how long and slender her fingers. How comely are her feet. How well-rounded her thighs. None of the maidens and none of the brides that enter the bride chamber are fairer than she. Her beauty is greater than all other women, and she excels them all. Moreover, along with all this beauty, she hath great wisdom, and the workmanship of her hands is fair indeed. 67. When he heard these words, Pharaoh lusted after Sarai, and he sent his servants to fetch her to him. So notice how, in part 1 I shared from the testament of Reuben, I shared from the testament of Yosef, and then in part 2 I shared the account of David, the account of his son Amnon. I also shared what happened to Jacob's daughter, Jacob's daughter, with Shechem. And all of them are similar. You know, it all starts with the eyes. They take in the individual with their eyes, and they begin to lust after them. And so far, in almost all the accounts, they would seize that person, or take them by force, or, you know what I mean? And in our days, or even just in any time, the situation isn't always like that. Sometimes it might take a while. You know, maybe the person isn't as bold as, say, you know, these individuals were, you know, to where it just kind of builds up in their mind and in their bodies until they can't take it anymore. And then they might end up doing something like that. In these accounts, we see that maybe some of the reasons why they were able to seize the individual was because they were in some kind of power of authority, like they were a king or a sovereign. You know, they had some kind of power, right? David sent for Bathsheba. Pharaoh sent for Sarai, we just read. And Amnon was able to trick, you know, his object of lust, not even affection, lust. Reuben took advantage while Bilhah was sleeping, right? Potiphar's wife with Joseph, she daily, because he was always in the same house, or, you know, she would constantly approach him. So it happens in different ways, just depending on the outcome. And for some people, even though their lust is strong and intense for the individual, for the object of their lust, sometimes there might actually be fear in place where they don't dare say anything, and it's just constantly in their minds and building up over and over and over until finally they get bold enough to say something. You know, a lot of different situations, it can look a lot of different ways with these kinds of things, but I just wanted to point out that almost all the accounts that I've shared from Scripture are very similar to one another. Okay, so let's just pick up again in the beginning. So he said, when he heard these words, Pharaoh lusted after Sarai, and he sent his servants to fetch her to him. Knowing it to be the will of Yahuwah, I let her go. This is Abraham speaking. I let her go, although my heart was grieved within me. When Pharaoh saw her, his lust grew within him, for he was overcome by her beauty, and he took her into his household as his wife, and sent men to slay me, that I might not rise up to claim her. Okay. So I think that was all I wanted to read. I didn't want to read too much because I'm hoping to read this book here soon in the audio scriptures. So I'm going to read 69 real quick, chapter 69. So basically Abraham, prayed unto Yahuwah, and this is what Yahuwah did in answer to Abraham's prayer. He said, and Elohim hearkened unto my prayer and withheld his ruach, his spirit, from the Mizrites, the Egyptians, that none of them were able to come at their wives that night. In the morning, consternation reigned throughout the land of Mitzrayim, for no man had been able to lay with his wife all that night. Pharaoh also was greatly perplexed, for although his lust towards Sarai had grown throughout the night, he had been unable to satisfy that lust because of the curse of Elohim which rested upon him. Okay? So the reason why I wanted to share that part, give me just 1 second here, is because there are situations with these strongholds of lust that occur amongst individuals where sometimes they find that they can't satisfy that lust. And what ends up happening to that individual is it becomes it's already a stronghold and a bondage, but then it begins to affect their health in major ways. And I'll share some examples of that as I go into my experience that I had. So there's several different ways and outcomes that these situations, these strongholds and temptations that come through this wicked spirit of lust, this stronghold of lust, can have, and none of which are good. Either way you go, it's a bad thing. Even if you don't end up committing the sin physically, right? You don't get to that point, but this stronghold still impacts you negatively to the point of illness. Remember, we read in the account of David's son Amnon that his friend was like, "What's wrong with you? You look sick. You look ill. Like, what's making you, what's causing you this ailment?" And he's like, "I am like infatuated and lusting so much after Tamar," right? Which happened to be a sister. But, it literally, it's an obsession, infatuation, obsession. It overtakes you. It consumes your life and it affects you. You know how they talk about somebody being lovesick, right? What happens when somebody's lovesick? They can't eat, they can't sleep, right? Sometimes they'll lose weight on account of it. All they think about is that person. It becomes an obsession. It's unhealthy. Lust does the same thing, but I think it's even more intense, I believe. The difference between I want to say that being lovesick with somebody would probably tie into lust. I don't think it's a healthy way of loving, yes, to be in love, to love somebody unconditionally, to love your spouse, to fall in love with somebody in a healthy way is different from what I'm talking about, where I'm talking about lust, infatuation, obsession to the point that you're sick. It's affecting your everyday life. All you can think about is that person. You can't eat, you can't sleep. And for most, they get to the point where until they conquer that lust, until they get to that person, until they sleep with that person, it doesn't go away. It's like this quench that's not satisfied, right? It's like this fire that continues to burn until it's, you know what I mean? It's not a good thing. Okay. It's not a good thing. It's a wicked spirit that torments the individual basically, because it's not healthy. It's not a healthy love. It's not love. It's lust. It's infatuation. It's a stronghold. So that's the difference between that. The individual might feel like they're in love, right? But it's not. It's unhealthy, and it's lust, right? It's just pure lust. Look at what happened in the account with David's son Amnon. That afterwards he grew very angry with her and told her to leave, to get out, because it was like once he had satisfied it finally, when he slept with her, it just all went away. Like the blinders came off. I in part 2 I kind of explained it to be similar, parallel to somebody who joneses for a drug, a specific drug or alcohol, and they can't focus on anything other than that, and then finally they get a hold of it, they drink it or they take it, and then then they're kind of like, they calm down and they're like, man, I got really crazy there for a minute just for this, and now it just completely changes them, and that's what happened with him. It's like the minute that he was able to satisfy that, he was like, wow, I did all that for what? And now, now I've got this consequence on my hand, and now this, that, and the next thing. And it caused him to to feel guilty. And then that caused him to be angry, right? Look at what David did. David, a man after Yahuwah's heart, right? What did he ended up doing? He ended up abusing his power of being a king, right? He ended up trying to get her husband to be with her so that he could hide, right, the outcome of their union together, right? They're coming together. And then he ended up eventually having him killed. Reuben talks about how he suffered after that, and how still towards the very end of his life, he would still think about it, and it would still make him feel really bad. Poor Joseph. Joseph got to the point that he was on his knees pleading and begging with Yahuwah to deliver him from that woman. That woman, Potiphar's wife, she got to the point where she was willing to kill her husband. She was willing to kill herself. She was willing to do all of these crazy things just to sleep with Joseph. Brothers and sisters, let me tell you something. Yahuwah created sex, and sex is a beautiful, beautiful thing to experience. And Yahuwah created it for marriage, and there's a reason why he did that. But if you get to a point that you're consumed by an individual, or you're willing to do drastic things just to sleep with somebody, just to experience sex with a specific individual, there's something wrong. And the thing is that when you experience sex, okay, most of you probably know this, some of you may not. Sex is very pleasurable, and of course involves hormones. And that's why you can almost equate it to somebody who takes a drug and experiences a high, okay? Because when you have sex and when you're in the throes of passion, and when both individuals climax and then orgasm, it's this euphoric experience, right? It's an incredible, pleasurable sensation. And so what happens when we as human beings in flesh, when we experience things like that, like when somebody takes a drug and they experience a high, when someone drinks alcohol, even though alcohol is a downer, but they experience that high, that good feeling. Some even say they call alcohol liquid courage, because people then get really bold and they can do things that they wouldn't have been able to do sober, right? And same thing with sex. When you're in the throes of it, when you climax an orgasm, you experience this thing when you're like, wow, that felt amazing. And so what happens is your body can become addicted to that, okay? And then you want it more and more. Why? Because it makes you feel good. You literally release these hormones, and I forget the names of them because I'm not good at scientific terms. There are certain hormones that release like happy feelings. You know what I mean? They release certain things throughout your body that causes you to feel good. And there's actually even a scientific, proven fact that even for some, I don't know if it happens for women too, but for men, sometimes after they've climaxed and orgasmed and after they've made love, sometimes automatically they'll feel depressed or guilt. And it's all related to hormones, brothers and sisters. But my point is that lust is an addiction. It can be an addiction. Okay. And with that being said, I mentioned this in part 1. I want to mention this again. There's a video that Brother Adam Fink made that is an incredible video that I would encourage, if any of you feel that you have any lust of the flesh, doesn't have to be just sexual lust. If you have any lust of the flesh or any addictions that you are currently struggling with, I would highly, highly encourage you to watch this video that Adam Fink did called, I believe it's called Breaking Lust and Addictions. And again, you can find that on his YouTube channel in his ministry called Parable of the Vineyard, and just look up Breaking Lust and Addictions. Incredible video. I highly recommend anybody who's struggling with any kind of addiction, any kind of lust of the flesh. Again, it doesn't have to just be sexual. It could be other things. Okay, there are many things that people can become addicted to, and many things that are considered, lust of the flesh or works of the flesh. Okay, you could be dealing with anger. You could be dealing with jealousy, envy, addiction to food, right? Gluttony, or, there's all kinds of things. Okay, so I would highly, highly recommend and encourage to check out that video. Great video. It really helped me when I went through what I went through. So, but anyways, speaking of which, I'm going to go ahead and share a little bit about my experience. And let me tell you, brothers and sisters, I thought that this would never happen to me. And remember, I said, I can't remember if it was part 1 or part 2, don't ever think that it can't happen to you, because it can happen to anybody. Okay? It can happen to anybody, even if you've never been known to struggle with lust, even if you are married or getting ready to be married. If you are in love with somebody, brothers and sisters, you don't stop being attracted to other individuals, even when you're married. And then the truth of the matter is that we live in a society today that, sexuality, the perverseness of it is just, it's everywhere. Okay. It's in the TV shows, the movies, the music, online. I mean, my goodness, it's even accessible through YouTube. Okay. YouTube has a very dark side to it. Unfortunately, we have a lot of, men and women walking around in this world, very promiscuous and just very worldly. And, it's hard because, we all walk around, or at least majority of us walk around with sight, and that's where it begins. This is why I say it's important that we guard ourselves, brothers and sisters. And it will happen unexpectedly, and it can happen in a number of ways. Okay. A lot of it happens in the workplace. Okay. I was saying, I think in part 2, how, it was all part of Satan's plan, his systems, right? Because think about it. In biblical times, and even back, quite a few decades ago, our world was different in the sense of women were home. Okay. Which I believe that's where they still should be, because that's Yahuwah's plan. If you are mother and wife, our job is in the home. Our job is to keep up our home, to maintain our home, to raise our children, to care for our children. That's our job. And then as time went by, and I actually talked about this when I did a series in my podcast early on, I think in like the second season, where I was talking about, how society has, in the system of Hasatan, has changed the original plan of Yahuwah concerning marriage and family, husbands and wives, children, all that. And I actually read from this book that I have, excellent book, that explains how things actually changed throughout time. There were like 3 phases throughout, from like the late 1800s to like the 1960s up until today, the different phases, right? And what happened along those phases were women started to no longer be in the home. Now women were coming into the workplaces, and so on and so forth. Why is that a problem? Because it's opened the door more for men and women to have what Reuben said in his testament, these constant meetings. And I'm even talking about married men and women that were now interacting with each other more so than they were their own families, their own spouses. Because people have to work 8 to 10 hours a day, right? Just to survive. What do you think is going to happen eventually? The more time you spend with the opposite sex, especially if there's an attraction. And brothers and sisters, that's what happened to me, except it wasn't in the workplace. It actually happened in my own home. Hasatan was so crafty and so cunning and got me where I was most vulnerable and weak in that season. And this individual that I struggled with actually ended up showing up to my door. It can happen anywhere and anytime. And that's why I've said this before in many of my episodes, that even when you get married, do not stop praying for your marriage and for your spouse. You need to be in constant prayer, because even more so when you come into your marriage, Hasatan is going to find new ways to attack your marriage, to damage your marriage, and possibly destroy it. Okay? And one of the biggest ways that he does that, there's 2 ways actually. And even within the world, even among some believers, these are the 2 main problems you see in a marriage always: finances and the area of intimacy. It's always those 2 things for the most part. So I've talked about this before, that one of the biggest ways that the enemy will seek to damage and destroy your marriage is through the marriage bed. Okay? It's enough that our husbands, right, they have to go out and work to provide, okay? Whether it's for themselves if they're still single, or for their families, okay? They already have to go out and be amongst the world. And that's difficult in and of itself. Why? Because our husbands are out there. And then we've got these wicked women, right? Reuben talked about this. Joseph talked about this, how women are wicked and they use their strengths in their strengths are beguiling men. And they do it with their wiles, right? So think about it. The husbands face just as much of, danger when it comes to this. Because sadly, there are many women out there. They don't care if that man is married or not. That for different reasons, they will go after a man. And men fall prey to this all the time. Look at what I read in Proverbs 7, right? In part 2. So wives, that's why it's so important that we're always praying over our husbands, because every day they go out to work, every day they're out in the world and they're around this. Why? Because once again, like I said, women are now in the work and they have been in the workplaces for decades now, right? And please understand, I'm not trying to disrespect anybody or stereotype or anything like that. I'm just speaking truth, okay? Men can no longer be just the blame when it comes to these types of things, when it comes to cheating and all this. Men are not always to blame. The women are even more to blame. And this is why it's such a problem that the women are now in the workplace. A lot of men wouldn't fall victim to this, and none of this would really happen if women weren't in the workplace. And that's just one of several things, okay? But it's one of the main ones. I mean, think about it. Even when you look at a show or a movie, when something like that happens, it always starts in the workplace, right? Mine, even though I'm at home all the time, mine actually happened in my home, and I was just at a loss with that. Because I thought, wow, this didn't even happen. Like, I didn't even meet this individual going somewhere or whatever. Nope. This individual literally showed up at my door. Okay, so, last year for me and my family was pretty rough. Okay, we went through some trials. And last year, right before Sukkot, or actually right after Sukkot, so right after the feast days, I had gone through quite a bit with my oldest son and things like that. I'm not going to get into details, but anyways, I was feeling really vulnerable in that season, and just had a lot going on, and was alone a lot. Okay, was alone a lot for reason that, again, I don't want to share a lot of details, so I'm trying to explain this to where it's going to make sense and not leave like questions but with also trying not to share too much either for the sake of my family and things like that. So hopefully y'all understand that. But anyways, I was in a vulnerable season and I was alone a lot. And it just so happened that the individual happened to live in the same complex that we do, and is also one of the maintenance technicians for the apartment complex. Okay. And in that season, because where we live, there was a lot of change within their management and staff. A lot of that was due to the pandemic and so on and so forth. And I guess finally last year, they finally had a new team come in. And anyways, because of all those changes and things like that, work orders, maintenance orders got backed up. And so for my apartment, there were several things that needed to be caught up, that needed to be done as far as maintenance wise. So it just so happened that the individual that I had this, situation with, was new and happened to be the one to show up to my door to take care of these work orders over a course of time. And what that did was that opened the door for things to transpire. And so I remember upon meeting this individual for the first time, I was immediately attracted to him and him to me. I was attracted to him because, believe it or not, he actually resembled, my husband. And during that time, the thing was that my husband was working like 12 hours a day, so I rarely saw him. Okay, so that's all I'm going to say there. But I found myself, upon meeting this individual for the first time, I was very attracted to him and he to me. And so as time went on, and every time that these work orders were completed for our unit, it would happen to be that same individual that would continue to come. And I began to notice, the chemistry between us. We would just talk about everyday ordinary things. And then our conversations went from that to personal things, where he would open up to me and share things, with me, that he had gone through or was going through, and then I would do the same thing. And so what ended up happening was we ended up, and again, I did episodes on this. I talked about this. I did an episode where I talked about emotional affairs, and that's what began, because this individual also was supposedly in a relationship, supposedly had a girlfriend. Okay. So, but here we are, every time we would come around one another, we would get really close, and we connected emotionally on a deep level. And I noticed this, and the thing was, as more and more time went on, I noticed that we were getting closer and closer. I knew things got really bad when I began to think about this individual all the time. This individual was always on my mind. I would be happy when, I would see him. He would be happy when he would see me. And then there was a point where we would run into each other everywhere. It's like we were always bumping into each other. I literally would pray, because I began to notice, okay, this isn't good. Not only am I attracted to this individual, there's great chemistry between us. Okay. And things are, getting close. And so I was like, okay, this isn't good. I would literally pray, like, Yahuwah, please don't let there be any more work orders or things that need to be done within the home, so that I don't have to see him. And then something would come up that I would have to put in a work order, or I would just go simply to check my mail and I would run into him. It's just like, it seemed like I got to the point where I was trying to avoid, because every time I saw him, it would stir up these feelings inside of me. And these feelings inside of me were intensifying more and more and more as time went on. And brothers and sisters, this went on for a course of like several months, okay, almost a year. This went on for several months, to where I was thinking about this person all the time. I got to the point where I was having intrusive thoughts, or maybe they weren't even intrusive. Maybe I was doing it, right? Because intrusive is like when the enemy starts sending you these thoughts that you would never think of yourself. Like, you would never think something like that. But I was getting to the point, brothers and sisters, where I started fantasizing about this individual. I started to fantasize and think about what it would be like to sleep with him. Okay? I was having these thoughts all the time. I began to lust after him, and he with me. It got really, really bad. I had never felt anything like that before, not even with my husband. Let me tell you, I have had crushes throughout my life. I have had what the world calls puppy love or infatuation or whatever. And of course, I've been attracted to men throughout my life. But it was different with this individual, brothers and sisters, to where I could not focus. It consumed me. I thought about him 24/7. I felt like this man had put a spell on me. I was like, this has to be witchcraft or something, because I had never, ever in my life gotten to the point where I had zero self-control over myself concerning another person. It was that strong. It was that strong to where I knew that if he kept coming by, that it was just, I was going to end up sleeping with him, because it was that strong. I felt like I could not control myself. And he had much respect for me. He very respectful individual. But you could tell the sexual tension between us, and it just kept building and building and building. And then on top of that, we had connected on a very deep emotional level as well, which is usually how it starts. Sometimes the situation can just be purely physical, but sometimes the two individuals will connect. This is why I say, and I think I said this in part 1 or part 2, one of them, where I said, do not befriend the opposite sex, especially if you're married, because eventually you connect, and that connection can open a door. A lot of people think there's nothing wrong with having a friendship with the opposite sex. There's a lot wrong with that. Okay? That's how it started for me and this individual. Then it got to the point where guilt and shame began to plague me and just eat away at me. Not only within my own marriage, but with Yahuwah. Because I got to the point where I couldn't pray. I couldn't open the scriptures. I couldn't do my podcast. I couldn't do my ministry, because I'm like, how can I go on, and counsel people or release marriage words and things like that when this is happening in my life, in my own life. I couldn't pray. I couldn't read scripture. I couldn't even bring myself to talk to Yahuwah, even though I had pleaded with him to deliver me from this stronghold, from this individual. It completely caused me to fall away from Yah and fall hard. It stopped my ministry, and I had shame. If any of you have ever dealt with shame, you know what I'm talking about, shame and guilt. If you haven't, it's one of the worst feelings in the world that was eating away at me every day. Every day. And it was hard because I felt like just empty inside. And I felt like, okay, I've been a believer 12 years, and everything, the growth, everything through these 12 years, I just completely lost all of that. I felt like I went 3 steps forward and 20 back. I felt so terrible because of what this was doing to me. It was so bad, brothers and sisters. Like, it got to the point where this man would be in my home, right? And he would leave. And I would still be able to smell just his natural scent. And just his natural scent alone stirred up lust. I lusted after this man to the point that it was making me sick. I missed him when I didn't see him or didn't get to talk with him, or, it got really bad, brothers and sisters. It got really bad. It got really bad. And it changed me, brothers and sisters. I fell back into my old ways. Like, I began to listen to music that I hadn't listened to in years, that I had put away from me. I began to watch things on TV, which I don't even watch hardly much TV. And I began to watch things that had to do with what I was going through. I was watching these shows and movies that had to do with people having affairs. I fell, brothers and sisters, and I fell hard, and I even fell back into old ways that I had put away from me years ago when I first became a believer. I literally went backwards. So not only did this whole entire situation create this intense, wicked stronghold over my life and consumed me, but it caused me to fall away from Yah in a big way. In a big way. and feeling like I had no control, that this situation controlled me, the walking around feeling shame and guilt every single day. I only told a couple of people about this situation who were people that I trusted, that were close friends of mine, that I'm thankful that I at least had them, because I needed to tell somebody. I needed to confess what was going on in my life, and I needed to let it out, I couldn't hold it in anymore. And I'm so thankful that I had those people to be able to go to, and that these people never judged me or anything like that. And they prayed with me, and they helped me through it. And brothers and sisters, the thing is that when you go through a situation like that and you're trying to get away, you're not even trying to pursue it. It's kind of like Joseph's account, right? Like what he went through. It's hard to get away from it when you're constantly around the person. Like Joseph, he worked. It was his master's wife, and he worked in his master's home. So he was around this woman all the time. It was the same thing with me, because this person not only lived in the same place I did, but also worked here. So I saw this person every day. Okay, just about every day. And me, and it got really, really bad. He got to the point where he was pretty much lovesick and lusting as well. And it got really bad, brothers and sisters. It got really, really bad. What I can say, and what's on the more positive side to this, because again, I'm not going to go into a lot of detail. There's more, but I'm not gonna share too much. What I can tell you is, praise be to Yahuwah, that things never got to the point of going all the way. Okay? But I will tell you that the effects of all of it and everything that has transpired is just as equally bad. But praise be to Yahuwah, I was able to finally at some point set a boundary physically, but I was still being tormented in my mind and in my soul, and same for him. Sometimes the way that he would look at me, I knew that he had fallen, and that it was tormenting him as much as it was me. And it changed things in his situationship, I guess, because it wasn't really a relationship. It altered things in his situationship, and it affected my marriage. And we didn't even go all the way. That's why I say that it doesn't always just come down to the physical aspect of it. It can be the emotional as well. Soul ties can happen in different forms. And that's what happened between me and this individual. We formed a soul tie. I'm telling you, I had never been through anything like that. And I will tell you, I have walked through a lot in my life. A lot. But this was one of the most challenging trials that I had ever been through. It broke me, brothers and sisters. I fell. And I felt like I had no control whatsoever over my life. It consumed me. It plagued me to the point that everything was about this individual. I mean, it got really bad, brothers and sisters. It got really bad. And you know what? I'm even going to, I'll share this real quick. And I only know this because this was before I became a believer. And I was still in the world, and, I still saw certain movies that, Hollywood produced and came out with. But I don't know if any of you ever saw this movie, and I would never, ever recommend anybody to watch it. But it was a movie that came out in the late 90s called Practical Magic. And anyways, it had to do with these two sisters that I guess came from, a family line of, witches and things like that. But anyways, there was a part in the beginning, I think it was in the beginning of the movie, their parents died. So the sisters, when they were young, they went to live with their aunts, and their aunts were witches. And there was a part where this lady shows up at the house of these aunts, and she's like crying and just hysterical. And anyways, the sisters were watching in the background. They were young. They were children. And anyways, the deal with this lady was that she was so lovesick over this man who was married. He was a married man. She was so lovesick over him. And she was telling them, like, you have to, please do something. Please help me. Like, he has to leave his wife. He just has to leave his wife. I need him. I have to have him. I have to be with him. Like, that's how much she was lusting after this man. She was lovesick. She was obsessed with this man. And she's just like hysterical, crying, like, please do something. I'm willing to do whatever. He has to leave his wife. Like, please, And so anyways, she basically was asking them to do this love spell. Okay. And so that the man would leave his wife and love her. And I actually read, because there was a book to this movie. I actually read the book. Okay. I was really young. I was like in my late teens, I think, when that came out. I actually read the book, and in the book, it actually says that woman then later on went crazy because the man, so like they did the spell and all that, the man left his wife, came to her, whatever, and the man ended up being so obsessed with her that it drove her crazy. So like, witchcraft is never good, and to be with somebody out of obsession or lust or infatuation, things like that, is never good. Never. So anyways, it basically equates to that. That's what it's like. And in some of the accounts that we read throughout the scriptures seemed that way. Like I said, look at what happened to David's son, to where he was to the point that he was ill. He was sick. Like, all he could think about was her. Like, Reuben, same thing. He said he couldn't sleep until he went and did something about it. I mean, look at Potiphar's wife with Joseph, right? She was willing to kill her husband. She was going to kill herself. And she got to the point where she basically tried to rape Joseph. That's how dangerous it is, brothers and sisters. Now, praise be to Yah, I never got to that point, but it was strong. It was strong. To where I was willing, and I'm ashamed to say this, I'm ashamed to admit this, I was willing, and praise be to Yahuwah, he didn't let me go that far. It almost, but I was willing more than once to lie with this man, and he with me. And that's not in my person to ever do something like that, especially knowing that he was supposedly in a relationship and I'm, married. That's how strong and intense the feelings of lust were. And I would think about all the ways that it could happen and how easily it would happen, because he would come to my home and it would just be us. Nobody would have ever been none the wiser. We could have slept together, and nobody ever would have known. We could have fulfilled it, fulfilled our lusts and be with each other as many times as we wanted to be, and nobody would ever know. That's how bad it got for me. And praise be to Yahuwah that it didn't happen. Praise be to Yahuwah that it didn't get to that. It almost did. It almost did. Things got touchy-feely physically. Things got touchy-feely emotionally. They got bad, brothers and sisters. But praise be to Yahuwah, I never committed it. And neither he with I. And I truly believe it's because he had a lot of respect for me, and because of my walk, because of having the Ruach. Even though I've battled so hard with this stronghold of lust, this spirit of lust, it didn't stop me from constantly fantasizing about it, from thinking of this man, from allowing it to consume me mentally, right, and emotionally. So very, very, just very, very powerful, brothers and sisters. And it is something that still to this day I'm ashamed of, and I'm working on forgiving myself. And I truly believe it was an attack from Hasatan. It's a wicked, wicked spirit. And he literally sent it right to my door. I didn't even have to go nowhere. For some people, they connect online. Some people, a lot of people, it's in the workplace, right? It's different ways that it can happen, brothers and sisters, different ways. And let me tell you, I was an individual that thought it would never happen to me, especially after I got married. I've always been a person of tremendous faith and faithfulness. And that I would never do something like that. That's never, I would get angry if I ever heard that people would do that. And I'd be like, how can people do that? And this and that. And then it ended up happening to me. And I was still unfaithful, brothers and sisters. I was still unfaithful because I connected with this man on a very deep level emotionally. And he was unfaithful to the person he was involved with, right? That's why I did the episode that I did called Emotional Affairs. You can still commit adultery that way. And that's why I say to not befriend the opposite sex when you're married or involved with somebody. Just don't do it. You will regret it. I think I even shared there, couples can be friends with other couples, and it can still happen. It can still happen, brothers and sisters. It is a wicked, evil spirit that can come upon anybody. It's a serious, as I've said throughout all 3 of these episodes, it's serious, brothers and sisters. And I just pray that you will listen to all 3 of these episodes. Read for yourselves the accounts that I read from the scriptures. And whether you're married or not, you need to pray as a protection around you against that spirit. And it's one of the biggest ways, the Hasatan, that Satan will target an individual or a marriage. Because it's one of the biggest temptations out there. Sexual temptation is huge, amongst other things. So I just pray, brothers and sisters, that these episodes were of some help, and that they were a blessing for you, and that you would guard yourselves. Again, whether single or married, guard yourselves, guard your purity, guard your body, your mind, guard your eyes, your ears. Pay attention to what you're looking at. Pay attention to what you're listening to. Okay? Continue on a righteous path. Seek Abba. Continue to follow him. Be in his word daily. Be in prayer daily. Submerge yourselves in him and in his word so that you have a less chance of this happening to you. I won't say it won't ever happen, because it can. But you can lessen your chances by being submitted unto Yahuwah through Yahushua and in his word and in prayer. And be on guard, brothers and sisters. Be set apart from the world. If you see anything that's going to tempt you, turn away from it. Turn away from it. Get rid of it. Get rid of the apps. Get rid of the TV if you have to. If you see somebody walking in the street that would draw your attention sexually, turn away. Practice self-control. Pray for the fruit of self-control. Okay? Pray against the spirit of lust. Protect yourselves. Pray over your spouses. Pray over, even if you don't even know who they are yet, pray for them concerning that. It's so vital, brothers and sisters. I can't express it enough. So that's it, brothers and sisters. That's it for this episode. If you have any questions, concerns, prayer requests, anything like that, please send me an email. And be on the lookout for hopefully more audio scriptures coming out soon. And again, brothers and sisters, please, no judgment passed to me. Please, no email sent to me condemning me or anything like that, please. It took a lot for me to share what I did, to admit to what's, happened. And that's not an easy thing to do. So, but anyways, nonetheless, I pray that it blesses somebody and that it helps whoever that it may help. And that's everything. So thank you so much for listening to this little mini-series on this topic. I love you all so much. May Yahuwah bless you abundantly. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll talk with you in my next episodes. Shalom.